Hello everyone, my name is Alyssa White and welcome to the Dear Journal podcast, a podcast where we talk about any and everything and freak out about life together. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and let's get straight into it. Alright guys, welcome back to another episode. I think that today's topic is a little overdue because I really have been wanting to talk about athletic identity and how that is affected with injuries and how just kind of our culture has very much created athletic identity as something that has to be taken and resonated with in order to be successful at your sport. So today I wanted to talk about the pros and cons of kind of associating with athletic identity. And if you don't know what it is basically the degree to what a person identifies with their sport and how much value they put into it and self-worth they put into it. So a lot of pros with athletic identity and being so committed to a sport is obviously you learn dedication, you are, very focused on something and get self-confidence, self-esteem, and, you build a lot of friendships. I mean, sports can teach you so many lessons about, what can kind of pay off with hard work. But that being said, on the flip side of that, there is a lot of, I think, toxicity when it comes to kind of forcing kids to specialize when they're younger in a sport and be so dedicated to that sport and identify so much with it that they are not a very well-rounded person and don't have other interests and hobbies. And it basically ends up with a bunch of athletes, younger athletes, or even adult athletes that have so much value and so much of their self-worth in their athletic identity, and we get so caught up in how we're performing on the court or the field and how that translates to our self-worth. Like if you're not performing well, then you're not feeling good as a person. Your mental health is taking a downward trajectory, right? And mental health is a big thing with sports right now. I know, especially with the goalie from Stanford, like this has been a topic that is very much getting some more kind of coverage because, you see all of the success stories, you see all of the Michael Jordans, Abby Wambachs and all of these things. And yet it's like, but how much of their identity was in their sport? Because I do think that there's such a pushed narrative that you have to be absolutely 100% day in, day out dedicated to that sport, living, breathing, everything, to be like successful to that level. And I do think that's true in a lot of aspects. You have to put in a certain amount of hours, you have to study the game, all those kinds of things. But what is the problem is that nobody's looking at it like, okay, what are these other people's outlets, right? Like, if your sport is your main outlet, then, and it is for a lot of people, it's been mine for a long time, and it can be your main outlet, right? But you need to have other things that you care about and that you do with the rest of your time. Because if you're only going to practice and then, going home, watching sports and, all of your friends are made through your sport, it's like, okay, what happens then when you are injured or when you are involuntarily taken out of your sport and have to retire for maybe a career-ending injury, right? Or you just age out in general. It is one of the biggest kind of crisis that happens because, especially in the US, I mean, a lot of people do sports in a way, and so many people have their identity attached to that sport. And especially in my situation, I think this is very relevant, and that's why I wanted to talk about it as well. Injuries will make you have to take a step back and look at how much am I really developing my whole life? Am I taking the time to, search around with other interests and other hobbies and see what else I'm interested in or maybe be even good at? But there's such a kind of lash back with that, in that if you spend your time or dedicate any other time to something else besides your sport, that it is negatively affecting it, and you're not putting in as much time on the court or on the field, so then it's a negative impact on your game and you're not going to be as successful. Which I don't think is true, because I think when you have other outlets for your mind to go and to kind of take you away from maybe if you're not performing right, then you're going to be able to come back refreshed and not have so much of your just worth and, performance in how you're doing, right? Because you can come back and just enjoy playing. And so many people forget to just enjoy playing and to be grateful that you're playing. Because anybody can tell you when you have a serious injury that all you want to do is be back on the field, right? If you really like your sport and you do have a lot of your athletic identity wrapped up in it, then it is pretty hard to be taken off for months at a time, maybe a year longer, and people don't understand until you go through it, and they're so gung-ho about being like, okay, well, I'm doing everything for this sport and everything else is a waste of time. And then you quickly get a reality check when either you're not playing well, you're having quite a rut, or you get taken out with injury, because you're like, well, I can't get my self-confidence, my self-esteem from the sport anymore, because I either can't play it or I'm just not playing well, and it's taking a big toll on my mental health. And it is so pushed, that narrative is so pushed on kids and athletes these days, that you have to be 100%, all of your time is in on that. And we do not take the time to develop these kids and athletes as whole people, They're entertainers, they're there to perform. And that's not true. Of course, sports as a whole is a form of entertainment, but it is also a way that people kind of learn about life. You learn how to work with people. You learn how to hold yourself accountable, to be dedicated to something, And while that is great, and that is so many things that you will take from your athletic identity, it can't be everything. You have to have other outlets, because if I learned anything from my first injury, I think that I had a lot harder time the first time I tore my ACL on my right knee, because I didn't really have other outlets. I did, I really still enjoyed art and everything, but not enough to where I was leaning into those and spending time really doing them. And it was hard. It was really hard going through that first ACL. And what was funny is the fact that I was in school and had a lot of other outlets to do during that time, and yet I was probably a lot sadder during that one than I am right now, not being in school. And it's because, one, because I learned a lot from that first experience, of course, but two, because I'm doing the things that I've always kind of wanted to do. This podcast is an example of that. I've always wanted to start a podcast, and a lot of the reason I did was because I wanted to pour my motivation and just kind of my creativity into something else while I was going through this injury, because you need to have other outlets to put that just kind of energy that you have from your sport, your dedication, everything into. Another one that I love is art. I've really also come to read a lot during this period. You need to have other things, and it's people just think if you're doing those, then you're taking away from your sport. If you are healthy and are playing, then you're not out practicing. But the thing about this is, with hobbies and having these other outlets, you're taking care of your mind and you're strengthening your mind. And people overlook that so much, because when you get back on the field after an injury or something, I have so much respect for people who go through injuries like this, because it is very isolating. You are very much on your own throughout the whole process. No matter how many people go through it, of course. Let me be clear, this ACL community, injured athlete community, is huge because it is so common. And you will always have people to reach out to genuinely who have been through your situation and understand. But when it comes to your mind, you really are feeling very isolated in the fact that you might be the only person on your team that has an injury. Or in my case, I literally had to leave my team, go back home, and I don't even see them. And they were like my best friends at that point, right? And like, that's very isolating, you know? I mean, that's why it is also it's important to have friends outside of your sport, because, you know, if your only best friends are in your sport and, you know, you're taken out of that, obviously that's going to negatively affect your mental health. And, you know, being injured is hard. You're seeing everybody play. You're not able to. And I know, at least with me, it hurt me so much more to watch practices and to watch games, because I just wanted to be out on the field. And you'd think, you know, oh, you want to stay involved in the sport. Of course. I mean, I'm watching games right now, like Premier League and Champions League, but watching my team play still hurts, because of course I want to be there, you know, like, of course you want to be on the field. So when you're isolated like that, it takes a toll. You're not, you know, you can't associate with that sport as much as you would want to, and you don't feel like an athlete for months, which sucks. I mean, most people who are pursuing athletics at like a high degree, you know, they're going to try to be pro, have been playing since they were, you know, young. I've been playing since I was 3. And when I was in high school, middle school, all the way up, probably until from I was about 7 and started playing travel club soccer, I was playing year round till I got my first ACL injury in 2020. And like, imagine that, going from absolutely playing year round, you did not stop, you were constantly in shape, constantly playing, because right when high school ended, then club soccer started, and even in the summer, one was ending, another one was starting. And so you were constantly practicing, you were constantly just going, you know, you didn't stop really. The most that I wouldn't play was maybe like 2 weeks for vacation, and then you were back in it. And to go from that to being out for like 9 months is such a mental challenge. I mean, I think it's completely valid that I was very sad during that first ACL injury. I mean, I had to completely shift my mindset. And I've talked about this to, I think, other people before, but I literally just kind of created this switch in my head where I was sidelined and on the bench for so long that I didn't even think about playing anymore, like, because it hurt to think like that, you know. I was like, oh, you know, like, what would I do in that situation, like on the field, if I'm watching my team play? Instead, I flipped a switch and was just kind of like thinking about it from just a purely observing standpoint, you know, not about if I was on the field. And that actually became a challenge when I went back on the field finally, when I was healthy again, because I had been observing and sitting on the sideline for so long that it was weird for me to see myself on the field again, which had never happened before. I mean, that is very weird. And to kind of allow myself to identify with the sport again as much as I did, because I mean, I went to Spain, I was only playing soccer, I wasn't doing school. So yeah, that was pretty much, was, you know, still toggling with that identity wise. Now, you know, I've always had other interests, and especially after that first ACL, I leaned into a lot of those more. I read, I did art, you know, and now with this injury, I'm finding even more things that I wanted to do, and podcasts, YouTube has been a lot of those outlets for me. And it is important to have other things that you take your self-worth from. And self-worth can have like a negative connotation, but I just mean like self-esteem, self-confidence. You know, there are so many just kind of societal pressures when it comes to being an athlete, in that, you know, especially a lot of parents are, you know, pressuring their children, you know, to be successful and dedicate their own time into it. And it's actually very interesting to see what kind of kids get burnt out when they're not the ones who are pushing themselves to do it. Their parents always were. And so when they get to college, they're like, I never actually wanted to do this. This wasn't me who wanted to do that. And so, they're able to kind of disassociate their identity from athletics because they were never fully in it either because it was their parents pushing them. But when it comes to associating with athletic identity, it is very hard to separate that. And a lot of people won't until you get a reality check and you are forced to. And this is just kind of my caution, my warning to you that if you've never had a big injury, you've never been taken out for a long time from your sport, then I think you should probably check yourself and know that, sports is a short shelf life, okay? Most people are retiring at early or mid-30s, somewhere around there, maybe 40s if you're just kind of in really good shape. And, that's not even that's maybe half of everybody's life expectancy, right? So you've got this whole other period of your life to go through, and you've got to figure out, what other things do I have? Am I, spending enough time with my family? Am I really rounding off my life enough to where I have other things to lean back on? You need a safety net. You really do. Athletics is a very short shelf life, and you need a safety net under you. And if you think that's a waste of time and that it'll prevent you from being successful in some way, I'm going to let you know right now that that's not true at all, and that it'll in turn most likely positively affect your game because you will be that much stronger mentally because you know that you have other things. I always get scared to say this, and I probably couldn't have before my first ACL surgery, in that I will be okay without soccer. I will be okay. I've spent months now living, a life that is not centered around sports, okay? And while I've still been doing all the things I need to do to get back to my sport, and I've still been dedicated a lot, that is, there's such a toxic, kind of mentality that if I say that, I'll be okay with it, without it, then people will be like, oh, well, you're not that dedicated, you're not going to make it because, you're not living, breathing everything about the sport. And, that's not true, I am very dedicated to the sport, and I love it a lot. And it has been a huge part of my identity, is still a huge part of my identity. But I know I'll be okay without it if I was, involuntarily taken out of it indefinitely. Right? This is temporary. My ACL right now is temporary. I will be back. But that's me choosing to come back to the sport because I love it that much, and I'm willing to put in this much time and effort into getting back on the field, And I think that as a whole, we need to kind of scratch that mentality that you have to only do your sport to be successful. You need to have other things because it negatively affects your mental health if that is your only outlet. And I will continue to say that because I think that is so important and is so underlooked or overlooked. One of the two. But this is just kind of a caution to all of listeners that, don't get too wrapped up in your sport. Obviously, be dedicated, take the time to do it, but also when you're done with practice, let yourself do other things. You don't need to, you can go home and watch sports, but that shouldn't be the only things you're doing, Pour yourself into something else that you will have to fall back on and that you can get self-confidence from and self-esteem, and just makes you a more well-rounded person, because it's just so dangerous when you don't allow yourself to be involved in other things. And the biggest thing about athletic identity is that is where a lot of people take their purpose from. Your purpose is being an athlete. Your purpose is showing up on game day and performing. And if that's not going well, then that's kind of all you had. And it's just such a very rocky foundation to exist on, And I think so many times we see that with pro athletes and the success stories, that it has to be that way to be successful. And it's just, I don't think that's true. There's so many people who do have more well-rounded lives and that will be okay when it comes to the end of their career in sports, because you're doing yourself a favor by kind of preparing yourself for the end of your career. And of course, you don't want to think about that. Nobody wants to think about that. If you really love your sport, you don't want to think about being taken out of it. And yet it is not just a possibility, but a definite thing that will happen at some point. So setting yourself up for success is very important. And I think that's the thing, is so many younger athletes and kids are just set up for failure right off the bat when it comes to them finding purpose and feeling successful, having self-esteem and all of these things, because it is all thrown in, they're putting all their eggs in one basket. And I think in every other circumstance, that's proven to never really work very well. And yet, it's like the whole thing of, well, if you do throw all your eggs in one basket, then you got nothing to lose. You're fully in it to win it, right? And yet, a lot of circumstances out of your control can take you out of that, whether you like it or not. So you might as well diversify your interests and diversify who you are as a person. Like, you need to have other things that you're interested in, that your mind can go to another place when it can't be focused on sports, or it shouldn't be. If you're not playing well and you need to take your mind off the game for a little bit, then that is what these things are for. So again, today's episode is really just kind of putting these things out there. I could literally do a whole nother episode about just like the main kind of qualities that people have that make them a successful athlete, I think. And I think that'd be very interesting. And also just injuries. If you guys want to hear more about kind of how to cope and deal with that and some kind of strategies I've used, just let me know. But today was just kind of a caution to anybody who has a very big self-worth in their athletic identity, and how that they should probably diversify that in order to become a well-rounded person and really just have other outlets, and that will positively affect you in your sport in the long run. So that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening to the Dear Journal podcast, and I hope you enjoyed diving into today's topic. If you want to continue to get updates and stay notified, you can either turn on the notifications or follow me on Instagram at alyssa.white.22. That is all for today's episode, and I hope I see you next time.